Welcome to Podsauce. I'm Dax Holt.
I am Alesha Renee.
And we got a fun one today. We got, what?
Well, we have a live one for sure.
We got a live one, that's right.
We got a live one for sure.
We've got Elise Loehnen. She is the host of Pulling the Thread, which I'm going to go on a little. A lot of people are going to recognize her voice because she was on the Goop podcast for a very long time. Now she's got this podcast, which is phenomenal, and it is getting a ton of praise. It's done by Cadence 13, and it is, everyone's been talking about this. Elise, can you give our listeners and our viewers a little rundown of what your podcast is about?
Well, thank you. That's very kind. Essentially, it's an interview show. They're 45 minutes. Ideally, I go sometimes to 60, despite my best intentions to be brief. And they're conversations with really interesting people, leading thinkers, experts, doctors, scientists, professors, about this moment of time that we find ourselves in and how we move forward, sort of on a personal, social, not so much political level, but everything's related, as you guys know. So really just trying to understand who we are, what we're doing here, and how we can move forward in a productive way.
I think what I love so much, Elise, about the times that we are in right now, especially coming out of the global panorama that has shaken a lot of us to our core, in some ways in challenging, very challenging ways, and in other ways very beautiful ways. One of them being the talks just around mental health and personal health, and taking more onus, more agency in owning that, and being unapologetic about speaking about the things that are throwing us off of our kilter. What made you want to start a podcast, like Pulling the Thread? Was it just going along those lines, or?
Yeah, it was, really getting a taste for it when I was at Goop. As you guys mentioned, I co-hosted that show for years, and it was one of the highlights of my career. I love audio in part because it lets you as a listener relax and not be stimulated visually, not have the world defined for you, and to really allow yourself to go into those spaces with the people that you're listening to in a way that's, I think, very nourishing and therapeutic. And there's obviously a ton of great podcasts out there now, many single topic issues, et cetera. But as a curious person, what I found when I was hosting the Goop podcast is that people felt like they could relate to me in the sense of the questions that I ask. And so I just wanted to get back to that in terms of leading those conversations and asking all the questions that people themselves who are listening have, if that makes sense. I think that's my special sauce, is sort of sitting in for the listener or the reader with these people and excavating their minds and experiences for that really not always so tactical takeaway, but often those really profound moments of resonance where people are like, oh, that completely recontextualizes the way I thought about this issue, or this sounds like me, or this gives me a pathway to understand myself better.
And if someone is tuning in for the first time, what episode do you feel like is a good first episode for them to check out? Because you've got doctors on there, you've got a lot of really important people. Yeah. So what episode would you say, check out this one first, and because that one is a phenomenal episode that's going to hook you into listening to all my episodes?
Yeah, I loved my first episode with Joy Harjo, just because you can hear the energy in her voice and what she's saying. She's the poet laureate. But I'd say maybe a recent one would be Harriet Lerner, who's a PhD, and she wrote The Dance of Anger. She's written a ton of books, but The Dance of Anger was a really important book and continues to be to this day to help us really excavate that emotion and understand what it's trying to tell us. Because I think so many of us, particularly in the pandemic, feel this anger, feel our boundaries have been crossed, feel, are sitting back watching various forms of injustice or environmental devastation happening. We don't know what to do with it. So she's a great therapist in that sense. So I'd start with her. And I think for men, listening to Terry Real, who that episode is kind of about male depression, but it's about a model for male depression that's not as well understood, but really speaks to the way that the culture and the patriarchy wounds men, and how wounded boys become wounding men. And this desire to separate boys from their feelings and from their more feminine, or what we would call feminine instincts, like feeling, how devastating that is. So I just gave you 3. I'm sorry.
No, I was like, I got a couple men, but I'm gonna send that episode in the group chat.
I saw that one, and that was going to be the episode I listened to, because I saw like battling men depression. I was like, oh, that sounds like a really interesting topic. But I got sucked into a different one, which was, I think, the latest one that you had. But your topics, I think that they do speak to that broad audience, and I think that's why it's resonating with them so well. What has been kind of your highlight so far in doing this podcast? Because, speaking to such brilliant people, I got to imagine you walk away and like, wow, I learned a lot today, or you learned something.
That's what I was just about to say. Like, when you do your podcast, Elise, are you the student or are you the teacher?
Student. So, a lot of the people I interview have written books, and that's usually where I start, sort of ground myself in what they've written so I can really understand their point of view and then help move them through the material. Because obviously, in 45 minutes, you don't get through a whole book. So in some ways, I'm a little bit of a guide of their own work, but really a student. And it's an ability to go a little bit deeper, or take what they've written and then sort of Venn diagram it with the experiences that we each have in our own lives. But yeah, no, I approach from a place of curiosity, wanting to learn, wanting to understand. As hard as it is culturally right now, really trying to keep an open mind and to listen to what people are saying rather than rushing to judgment or rushing to defensiveness. And, I think not everyone's not for everyone, but there's like nuggets. There's nuggets in every conversation. And so my hope as a host is that people trust me enough to be like, this doesn't on the surface sound like something relevant to my life, but I'm going to go and listen to this podcast about addiction and dopamine, for example, which was this past week. And hopefully there's something in there that's like, oh, actually this does apply to me or people I love in a way, or it helps me understand, a part of culture or human suffering in a different way.
So, you were at Goop for so long. Is there a chance that Gwyneth Paltrow is going to be stopping by?
Who knows? We'll see. Stay tuned.
I'm so curious, because I feel like that audience, that bringing over that audience to your new platform, I think is just such a good way to tie it in. And I think she is one of the most fascinating people out there.
Yeah. Well, it's always beautiful, too, when you're able to occupy a particular space and then take some of those lessons and those gems and those tools and then come over under your own umbrella and just really, like you said, take a student's seat and learn and also give out from that table. In that regard, Elise, who is your dream guest as a student? Whose table would you want to sit at?
Angela Davis. Who I haven't given up on.
She rarely gives it, but she gives it. Yeah. Is that your way of saying they nicely say, not right now?
They nicely say, we'll come back to you.
Yeah.
We'll come back
She's
to you.
busy.
Yeah, no, I would love to interview Angela Davis. And then also Robin Wall Kimmerer is another person who I'm like, I'll just ask like every month or two and see if you have anything that you want to talk about. She's a very busy professor. She wrote several books, but Braiding Sweetgrass. I don't know if you guys have read it, but it's such a beautiful book. So she's a professor. She's an ecologist, botanist. She studies moss, actually, which is fascinating, just as like a study in poetry. And she's a poet. And she is Native American, and so she approaches her work from that perspective and point of view around like ideas like honorable harvest and how do we act as stewards of the earth. And one of the central theses of the book, sweetgrass, which is a native plant, she does a study with one of her students where they look at different harvesting methods. And so there are 3 plots. There's yanking it fully out by the roots, there's pulling it so that the roots remain in the ground, and then there's the control plot that's untouched. And it's such a powerful example because what they found is that it didn't really matter how it was harvested, but that the plot that was untouched did the worst. And so her point isn't that we should just abstain from the environment or that we need to, pull back. Obviously we do, but that the gifts are there to be taken honorably, and that we need to engage with the earth in a really in a stewardship model, not to be extracting, mining, pulling things that were never intended to be ours. But I think it's a really beautiful way of thinking about the environment, because at least personally, I have this sort of we just need to not touch it. And we need to, stay away. And her answer is, no, we just need to engage responsibly. So I don't know, it's a powerful book.
Elise,
she's an incredible mind.
What kind of feedback have you been getting from your audience about pulling the thread? Is there some feedback that when you hear it, you're like, that's what I want to hear. That's what I'm trying to give to the audience, and they're getting it?
It's the feedback. I mean, it's all been really lovely. Obviously, some of the early listeners, because the show's only 2 months old, are people who listened when I was at Goop, and then I sort of have been on hiatus. So a lot of it has been oh, I'm so happy to have found you again, or you're back. But it's these the small moments of aha, of, oh my God, this unlock something for me in my mind, or even just that single takeaway. That's really all that I want, is that the conversation feels meaningful and clarifying, and that someone can listen and be like, this one nugget is enough for me to sort of feel like that was worthy of my time.
And we are a podcast discovery show. That is what we do. We are out there trying to give people the best recommendations. Do you have any recommendations for us on podcasts that you're listening to, podcasts that you enjoy?
So there are a few. I love Scene On Radio, which is hosted by John Biewen, and then he brings on different people to do series. And he did an incredible series on whiteness and race. And he also did an incredible series on, it's not even about misogyny, it's just about gender. And they're really easy to listen to. He has incredible people on. He really understands who he himself is in the culture, in a way that you're not annoyed listening to him, where you're like, you don't know what it's like to be a woman. He does that season with Celeste Headley, for example. So that for learning, I think he does an incredible job. And then I love the Poog. Have you guys interviewed the Poog girls?
The
Kate
Poog?
Berlant
No.
and Jacqueline Novak.
I thought you said the poop at first. I was like, wait, Elise.
No.
The Poog?
The Poog.
Poog. It's these two female comics, and they're hilarious and brilliant. And it's a take on, it's Goop backwards, and then it's also a play on Poosh. So, but it's not a takedown of wellness. It's their own fascination with wellness, but they do it through their own. It's just the two of them talking, and they're hilarious, and it's a good mental break. But it feels just like listening to really smart friends. And I love the deep dive with June Diane Raphael and Jessica St. Clair. Again, just two comics. And so I either want to be really learning something, or I want to be laughing.
Awesome.
Elise Loehnen, host of Pulling the Thread. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you guys.
Talk.
This was fun.
We try to be. We want you to come back, so we try to be. I don't want you to be I don't want you to hit us with the Angela Davis remark.
Yeah, she's busy.
She's booked. Okay, don't look around here.
No, anytime. I'll bring the ashwagandha.
Honey,
Nice.
and come in person. Come in person.
Yes.
I'll pour us some tea, bring a tincture, drop a couple of those little. We'll have a great time.
But you're gonna have to bring one of those Goop hoo-ha smelling candles. We got to know what that smells like.
I don't want a hoo-ha smelling candle.
They apparently explode. I don't know if you want one.
An exploding hoo-ha candle? No thanks, babe. No thanks.
Oh, Elise, you have been
Thank you.
awesome. Make sure
Yeah.
you guys check out Pulling the Thread. You can head on over to podsauce.com. We'll have a link there. This is Podsauce.